The night Caroline Fletcher became a duchess, she also became a ghost. 20 years old, married at dawn, exiled by dusk. Her husband, the powerful Duke Hugh Aldridge, stood in the doorway of their wedding chamber, cold as marble, and spoke the words that would haunt her. "You will leave for Greymoor tomorrow, alone. Do not expect me to follow." No explanation, no mercy. Just banishment to a crumbling estate on the Yorkshire moors, a place so remote, so forsaken, that even servants whispered it was cursed. But what Hugh Aldridge didn't know was this. The frightened girl he cast aside would become the woman who would bring him to his knees. If you want to see how a discarded bride becomes untouchable, stay until the end, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The morning of Caroline Fletcher's wedding began with frost and ended with fire. Not the warm kind. Not the kind that heats a hearth or lights a candle in the dark. This was the cold fire of humiliation, the kind that burns from the inside out and leaves no visible scar, only a hollow ache where hope used to live. She stood in the dressing room of her father's crumbling London townhouse, staring at her reflection in a mirror so old the silver had peeled away at the edges. The wedding gown hung on her like a shroud. Beautiful, yes, but suffocating. Ivory silk, seed pearls, lace imported from Brussels, paid for with money her family didn't have. Behind her, her mother fussed with the veil, hands trembling. "You look perfect, darling," her mother whispered, but her voice cracked. "Absolutely perfect." Caroline didn't feel perfect. She felt like a lamb dressed for slaughter. "Mama," she said quietly, meeting her mother's eyes in the mirror. "Tell me the truth. How bad is it?" Her mother's hands stilled. For a moment, the only sound was the distant clatter of carriages on the cobblestones outside. "Bad enough that this marriage saves us," her mother finally said. "Bad enough that without it, we lose everything." Caroline closed her eyes. Everything. The word tasted bitter. It meant the house, the land, her younger sister's future, her father's name, what little remained of it after the gambling, the bad investments, the slow, shameful slide into ruin that had consumed the last 5 years of their lives. And now, the solution. Hugh Aldridge, the Duke of Thornborough. 32 years old, wealthy beyond measure, powerful, untouchable. A man so far above the Fletchers in rank and fortune that his offer of marriage had felt less like a proposal and more like a miracle, or a trap. "He's a good man," her mother said, though the words sounded rehearsed. "He'll take care of you." Caroline opened her eyes and looked at herself again. The girl in the mirror looked small, fragile, breakable. She took a breath and forced herself to stand taller. "I'm ready," she lied. The ceremony took place in a chapel so grand it made Caroline feel like an insect. Marble columns, stained glass windows that threw colored light across the stone floor, candles burning in gold sconces, the scent of incense and old money. Hugh Aldridge stood at the altar waiting. Caroline had met him only 3 times before this moment, twice in her father's drawing room where he'd sat across from her with the stillness of a statue, asking her bland questions about music and weather. Once at a dinner where he'd barely looked at her at all. Now, as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she studied him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, handsome in the way that expensive portraits are handsome, perfectly composed, expertly lit, utterly lifeless. His dark hair was brushed back from a face that seemed carved from ice. His eyes, gray, sharp, unreadable, tracked her approach without a flicker of warmth. When she reached him, he offered his hand. His grip was firm, polite, empty. The priest began to speak, but Caroline barely heard the words. She was too busy watching Hugh's face, searching for something, anything, that might tell her who she was marrying. She found nothing. When it came time for the vows, his voice was steady, mechanical. "I, Hugh Aldridge, take you, Caroline Fletcher, to be my lawfully wedded wife." No hesitation, no feeling, just duty. Caroline repeated her own vows, and the words felt like stones in her mouth. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Hugh leaned in and brushed his lips against hers, so quickly, so coldly, that it barely qualified as a kiss. The chapel erupted in polite applause. Caroline felt nothing but dread. The wedding breakfast was held at Aldridge House, the Duke's London residence, a sprawling mansion in Mayfair that made Caroline's childhood home look like a gardener's cottage. The guests were a blur of silk and jewels and false smiles, aristocrats who barely acknowledged her, politicians who spoke only to Hugh, women who looked her up and down with thinly veiled contempt, as if measuring her worth and finding her lacking. Caroline sat at the head table, her untouched plate growing cold, and watched her new husband move through the crowd like a king among subjects. He shook hands, he laughed at jokes she couldn't hear, he never once looked her way. She felt invisible. "Your Grace." Caroline turned. A woman stood beside her, older, elegantly dressed, with sharp eyes and a sharper smile. "Lady Pemberton," the woman introduced herself, though she didn't offer her hand. "I wanted to offer my congratulations." "Thank you," Caroline said carefully. Lady Pemberton's smile widened. "You must be so relieved. After all, it's not every day a girl in your situation lands a duke." The words landed like a slap. Caroline's fingers tightened around her napkin. "I'm very fortunate." "Oh, indeed." Lady Pemberton leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Though I must say, it's all rather sudden, isn't it? One does wonder what convinced him to marry at all. He's been so resistant since the unfortunate business with Lady Isabel." Caroline's stomach turned. She'd heard the name before, whispered in drawing rooms, mentioned in scandal sheets. Lady Isabel Harcourt, Hugh's former fiancée, dead 2 years now, under circumstances no one seemed willing to discuss. "I wouldn't know," Caroline said quietly. Lady Pemberton straightened, her smile never faltering. "Well, I'm sure you'll manage. After all, the Aldridge Duchesses have always been decorative, if nothing else." She swept away before Caroline could respond. Decorative. The word echoed in Caroline's mind as the breakfast dragged on. Decorative, like a vase, like a painting. Something to be placed on a shelf and admired from a distance. Something without use. When the guests finally began to leave, Caroline found herself alone in a sitting room off the main hall, her head pounding, her corset too tight. The door opened. Hugh stepped inside. Caroline stood quickly, smoothing her skirts, her heart suddenly racing. He closed the door behind him and stood there, his expression unreadable. "We need to speak," he said. "Of course." She clasped her hands in front of her, trying to look composed. "I wanted to thank you for everything, for this marriage," he interrupted, his voice flat, "is a transaction, nothing more." The air left her lungs. He continued, his tone as detached as if he were discussing livestock. "Your father's debts are paid. Your family's reputation is preserved. In exchange, you bear my name and provide me with an heir when the time comes. Beyond that, I expect nothing from you." Caroline stared at him. "I don't understand." "It's quite simple." He crossed to the window, his back to her. "I have no interest in a conventional marriage. I do not require your companionship, your affection, or your presence. You will live separately. You will conduct yourself with propriety, and you will not make demands on my time or attention." Her hands began to shake. "You're saying, I'm saying that as of tomorrow morning, you will leave for Graymore." He turned to face her, and his eyes were as cold as winter stone. "It's an estate in Yorkshire. Remote, quiet. You'll have a household staff, an allowance, and everything you need to live comfortably." "Alone," she whispered. "Yes." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Caroline's mind reeled. But why? If you didn't want a wife, why marry at all? For the first time, something flickered in his expression, something dark and bitter and old. "Because I needed to," he said simply. "And you were suitable. Suitable. Not wanted, not chosen. Suitable." Caroline felt the room tilt. "And if I refuse?" His jaw tightened. "Then your father's debts will be called in immediately. Your family will lose everything. Your sister will have no dowry, no prospects, no future." He paused. "Do you refuse?" She couldn't breathe. She thought of her father's hollow eyes, her mother's trembling hands, her sister's laughter, bright and innocent and utterly unaware of how close they all were to ruin. "No," she said, the words scraping out of her throat. "I don't refuse." Hugh nodded, as if he'd expected nothing else. Good. The carriage will be ready at dawn. He moved toward the door. Hugh, Your Grace. Caroline's voice cracked. Please, just tell me why. He stopped, his hand on the door handle. For a long moment, he was silent. Because love is a lie, he said finally, without looking back. And I will not be made a fool of again. Then he was gone. Caroline didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window of the guest room she'd been given, not the Duchess's chambers, she noted bitterly, and watched the London streets below. Carriages rattled past, lamplight flickered. The city moved on, indifferent to her misery. At some point, her maid, a nervous girl named Eliza, brought her tea and tried to make conversation. They say Greymoor is very beautiful, Your Grace, Eliza offered timidly. Wild, but beautiful. Caroline didn't answer. What was there to say? That she'd been sold like cattle? That her husband despised her so much he couldn't bear to have her under the same roof? That she was being exiled to the edges of the kingdom, discarded like a piece of broken furniture? When dawn finally came, she dressed in traveling clothes, a simple gray gown, a wool cloak, and went downstairs. Hugh was already gone. Of course he was. A steward, a thin, officious man named Mr. Graves, stood in the foyer holding a leather case. Your Grace, he said with a small bow. The carriage is ready. I'll be accompanying you to Greymoor to ensure your safe arrival and to brief you on the household. How kind, Caroline said, her voice hollow. Mr. Graves didn't seem to notice her tone. He gestured toward the door. Shall we? She followed him outside. The carriage was black, polished, expensive. The Aldridge crest gleamed on the door, a lion and a sword, symbols of power and conquest. Caroline climbed inside and sank into the velvet seat. As the carriage rolled forward, she looked back at Aldridge House one last time. Somewhere inside, her husband was probably already forgetting she existed. She turned away and closed her eyes. The journey north took 5 days. 5 days of rain and mud and endless jolting miles. 5 days of sleeping in coaching inns that smelled of damp and ale. 5 days of Mr. Graves droning on about household accounts and tenant disputes and crop rotations as if any of it mattered. Caroline barely listened. She spent most of the journey staring out the window, watching England change around her. The tidy villages gave way to rougher country. The gentle hills became steep and wild. The air grew colder, sharper, tasting of stone and wind. On the 5th day, the carriage turned onto a narrow road that climbed into the moors. The landscape was brutal. Endless stretches of heather and gorse, rocky outcroppings that jutted from the earth like broken teeth. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the land with a weight that made it hard to breathe. We're close now, Your Grace, Mr. Graves said. Just over the next rise. Caroline leaned forward, her heart pounding. The carriage crested the hill, and there it was. Greymoor. It stood alone on a windswept plateau, surrounded by nothing but moor and sky. A fortress of dark stone, 3 stories tall, with narrow windows and a slate roof that gleamed like wet iron. Ivy crawled up the walls. The gardens, if they could be called that, were overgrown with weeds. It looked like a place where hope came to die. The carriage rolled through the iron gates and stopped in front of the entrance. Mr. Graves opened the door and offered his hand. Welcome to your new home, Your Grace. Caroline stepped out. The wind hit her immediately, cold and sharp, tugging at her cloak. The air smelled of rain and earth and something older, something wild. She looked up at the house. It stared back, silent and indifferent. The front door opened, and a line of servants emerged, a housekeeper, a butler, a handful of maids and footmen. They stood stiffly, their faces carefully blank. The housekeeper, a stern woman with gray hair and a ramrod spine, stepped forward. Your Grace, she said, her voice clipped. I am Mrs. Dawson. We've prepared the house for your arrival. Caroline forced herself to nod. Thank you. Mrs. Dawson's eyes flickered over her, assessing, judging. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your rooms. Caroline followed her inside. The interior was as cold as the exterior. Dark wood paneling, faded tapestries, furniture covered in dust sheets, The air smelled of disuse and damp. Mrs. Dawson led her up a wide staircase to the second floor and down a long hallway. "These are the Duchess's chambers," Mrs. Dawson said, opening a heavy oak door. The room beyond was large and spartanly furnished. A four-poster bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk by the window, no flowers, no personal touches, nothing to suggest that anyone had ever lived here. "Will it suit your Grace?" Mrs. Dawson asked. Caroline looked around the empty room and felt something crack inside her chest. "It's fine," she whispered. Mrs. Dawson nodded. "Dinner will be served at 7. If you need anything, ring for one of the maids." She left, closing the door behind her. Caroline stood in the center of the room, alone. Outside, the wind howled across the moors, and for the first time since the wedding, Caroline Aldridge, Duchess of Thornborough, allowed herself to cry. The first week was the hardest, not because of the house, though it was cold and drafty and full of strange creaks and whispers. Not because of the isolation, though the nearest village was 10 miles away and the moors stretched endlessly in every direction, but because of the silence, the crushing, suffocating silence of being utterly, completely alone. The servants were polite but distant. They did their jobs with mechanical efficiency, but they didn't speak to her beyond what was necessary. They didn't ask questions. They didn't offer companionship. Caroline took her meals alone in the dining room, a cavernous space with a table that could seat 20. She sat at one end, picking at food she couldn't taste, listening to the clock tick. She tried to fill her days with needlework, with reading, with walking the grounds. But the needlework felt pointless. The books, dusty volumes from the library, couldn't hold her attention, and the walks only reminded her of how alone she was. At night she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind, and she thought about Hugh, about the way he'd looked at her on their wedding day, or rather, the way he hadn't looked at her at all, about the coldness in his voice when he'd sent her away, about the words he'd spoken. Love is a lie. What had happened to him? What had Lady Isabel done to turn him into this? And why had he chosen to punish Caroline for it? On the 8th day, something shifted. Caroline woke to the sound of shouting outside her window. She threw on a dressing gown and rushed to look. In the courtyard below, 2 men were arguing, a grizzled farmer and Mr. Henley, the estate steward, a thin, nervous man who'd barely spoken to her since her arrival. "I'm telling you, the fence is down," the farmer was yelling. "Half my flock's wandered onto Blackwood's land, and he's threatening to keep 'em." "That's not my concern," Mr. Henley snapped. "Take it up with Blackwood yourself." "I've tried. He won't listen. I need the Duke's authority." "The Duke isn't here." "Then who's in charge?" Mr. Henley hesitated. The Duchess, I suppose." The farmer spat on the ground. "A woman! What's she going to do?" Caroline's hands tightened on the windowsill. What was she going to do? She could hide, pretend she hadn't heard. Let them sort it out themselves. Or she dressed quickly and went downstairs. When she stepped into the courtyard, both men froze. "Your Grace," Mr. Henley stammered, "I apologize for the disturbance." "Tell me what's happened," Caroline said, her voice steadier than she felt. The farmer looked her up and down, clearly unimpressed. But he explained the fence, the sheep, the dispute with the neighboring landowner. Caroline listened carefully. "And you've asked Mr. Blackwood to return the sheep?" she asked. "Aye. He says they're on his land, so they're his now." "That's not how property law works," Caroline said quietly. The farmer blinked. "Your Grace? If the fence came down through no fault of yours and the sheep wandered naturally, they remain your property. Mr. Blackwood has no legal claim." She turned to Mr. Henley. "Write a letter to Mr. Blackwood on Greymoor's authority. Inform him that if the sheep are not returned by tomorrow, we'll involve the magistrate." Mr. Henley stared at her. "Your Grace, I'm not sure—" "Do it," Caroline said. Something in her voice made him nod. The farmer, too, was staring at her, but differently now, with something that might have been respect. "Thank you, Your Grace," he said gruffly. Caroline nodded. "And Mr. Henley, have the fence repaired today?" "Yes, Your Grace." She turned and walked back inside, her heart pounding. It was a small thing, barely worth mentioning, but as she climbed the stairs back to her room, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. a flicker of power. The sheep were returned the next day. Word spread quickly among the tenants. The new Duchess wasn't just a decoration. And slowly, very slowly, things began to change. Tenants started coming to her with problems, disputes over water rights, concerns about crop yields, complaints about the mill that hadn't run properly in years. At first, Caroline felt overwhelmed. She knew nothing about farming, about estate management, about any of it. But she learned. She spent hours in the estate office, poring over account books and land surveys. She rode out to the tenant farms, asking questions, listening. She consulted with Mr. Henley, who, once he realized she was serious, proved surprisingly knowledgeable. She made mistakes. She made decisions that backfired. She faced pushback from men who thought a woman had no business managing land. But she didn't stop. Because somewhere in the cold, lonely weeks of exile, Caroline had realized something. Hugh had sent her here to be forgotten, but she didn't have to accept that fate. She could be forgotten, or she could be remembered. And if she was going to survive this, if she was going to endure the isolation, the humiliation, the heartbreak of being unwanted, then she needed to build something that was hers, not his, not her father's, not anyone's but hers. So she worked. Through the autumn rains and the bitter winter that followed, through frozen mornings and long, dark nights, through doubt and exhaustion and moments when she wanted to give up. She rebuilt fences, she negotiated grain prices, she learned to read the land, to understand its moods and needs, and Graymore, wild, neglected, forgotten Graymore, began to wake up. The tenants started to prosper. The mill was repaired, the roads were cleared, the accounts for the first time in years balanced, and Caroline, the frightened bride who'd arrived with tears in her eyes, became someone else entirely, someone stronger, someone who didn't need rescuing, someone who, when the wind howled across the moors, stood at the window of her stone fortress and smiled. Because this place, this wild, brutal, beautiful place, was hers, and no one, not Hugh, not London society, not anyone, could take that away from her. 3 years passed. 3 years in which Caroline received exactly 4 letters from her husband. The first arrived 6 months after her exile, a single paragraph informing her that her allowance would continue and that she should address all estate matters to Mr. Henley. The second came a year later, a formal notice that he'd be traveling to the continent and would be away indefinitely. The third, 2 years in, a terse inquiry about whether the estate was self-sufficient. She'd written back a single word, yes. The fourth letter arrived on a cold morning in late February, 3 years to the day after her wedding. Caroline was in the estate office reviewing grain contracts when Mrs. Dawson brought it in. "From London, Your Grace," the housekeeper said, setting it on the desk. Caroline stared at the familiar seal, the Aldridge crest, and felt her stomach tighten. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in Hugh's precise, elegant hand. "Caroline, I will be returning to England within the month. I intend to visit Graymore to assess its condition and to discuss certain matters regarding the estate's future. Expect my arrival by mid-March. H. Aldridge." Caroline read it 3 times. Then she set it down and looked out the window at the moors. He was coming. After 3 years of silence, 3 years of absence, 3 years of pretending she didn't exist. He was coming. And Caroline Aldridge, who'd been exiled, forgotten, dismissed, felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. Let him come. Let him see what she'd built from the ruins he'd left her. Let him see the woman he'd tried to erase. Because she wasn't the frightened girl who'd arrived at Graymore anymore. She was the Duchess, and this was her kingdom. The letter sat on Caroline's desk for 3 days before she touched it again. Not because she was afraid. Fear had been burned out of her somewhere between the first winter and the second, replaced by something harder, colder, something that tasted like iron and wind. No, she left it there because she wanted to see if it would change anything. It didn't. The estate still needed managing, the tenants still needed guidance, the moors still swept endlessly toward the horizon, indifferent to dukes and their intentions. On the 4th day, Caroline picked up the letter, walked to the fireplace in her study, and fed it to the flames. She watched the paper curl and blacken, Hugh's careful handwriting disappearing into ash. "Let him come," she said aloud to the empty room. Mrs. Dawson appeared in the doorway, a basket of linens in her arms. "Your Grace?" "The Duke is coming," Caroline said, turning from the fire. "We'll need to prepare the master's chambers. Air them out, change the linens, make sure the fires are laid." Mrs. Dawson's eyebrows rose slightly, the most emotion Caroline had ever seen from her. "When, Your Grace?" "Mid-March, according to his letter. 2 weeks, perhaps 3. "Very good, Your Grace." Mrs. Dawson hesitated. "Should we, prepare anything special for his arrival?" Caroline smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "No, Mrs. Dawson, we'll prepare what we always prepare. Nothing more, nothing less." The housekeeper nodded and left. Caroline returned to her desk and the stack of papers waiting there. Contracts, accounts, correspondence. The work that had become her life. If Hugh wanted to see Graymore, she would show him Graymore, but it would be on her terms. Not his. The first challenge came 3 days later, and it had nothing to do with Hugh. Caroline was in the fields south of the house, walking the boundary with Thomas Barrow, one of her more stubborn tenants, a broad-shouldered man of 40, with a face like weathered leather, and opinions he wasn't shy about sharing. "I'm telling you, Your Grace, the drainage is all wrong," Barrow was saying, gesturing at the muddy furrows stretching before them. "Every spring, same problem. Water sits here for weeks. Can't plant, can't plow. It's wasted land." Caroline studied the field, her boots sinking slightly in the soft earth. He was right. The water pooled in the low spots, turning good soil into swamp. "What do you propose?" she asked. Barrow scratched his jaw. "Dig a drainage ditch, run it down to the creek, but it'd have to cut through the edge of Moorfield's land." Caroline's stomach tightened. Moorfield. The neighboring estate, owned by Sir Edmund Moorfield, a man who'd made his disdain for Caroline abundantly clear from the moment she'd arrived. A man who'd refused to acknowledge her authority, who'd sent back every letter she'd written, who'd told anyone who'd listened that a woman managing an estate was an offense to natural order. "He won't agree," Caroline said. "No," Barrow agreed. "He won't." They stood in silence, the wind tugging at Caroline's cloak. "How much land are we talking about?" she finally asked. 20 feet at the widest point. A strip along his boundary. Wouldn't affect his crops none. It's all rough ground on his side. Caroline turned to look at him. "And if we do this without his permission?" Barrow's eyes widened slightly. "Your Grace, that'd be trespassing. Yes, I know." She looked back at the waterlogged field. "But the law also says that landowners have a right to drainage for agricultural improvement, provided it doesn't cause undue harm to neighboring property." "Sir Edmund won't see it that way." "No," Caroline said quietly. "He won't." She thought of the grain rotting in this field every spring, the lost income, the wasted potential. She thought of Barrow's family, his wife, his 3 children, who depended on this land to survive. She thought of Hugh's letter, of his impending arrival, of the assessment he'd promised. And she thought of the woman she'd become over 3 years, a woman who didn't wait for permission. "Dig the ditch," she said. Barrow stared at her. "Your Grace, start tomorrow. Work quickly. If Sir Edmund challenges us, I'll handle it." "He'll more than challenge us, Your Grace. He'll go to the magistrate, maybe even the courts." Caroline met his gaze. "I said I'll handle it." For a long moment, Barrow said nothing. Then slowly, a grin spread across his weathered face. "Yes, Your Grace," he said. "We'll have it dug in 3 days." Sir Edmund arrived on the second day. Caroline was in the estate office when she heard the commotion outside. Horses, raised voices, the sharp bark of orders being given. She set down her pen and walked to the window. A riding party had gathered in the courtyard below, 6 men on horseback, led by Sir Edmund Moorfield himself. He was a big man, barrel-chested and red-faced, dressed in expensive hunting clothes that strained across his gut. His horse stamped nervously as he dismounted with all the grace of a falling tree. Caroline watched as he strode toward the house, his men following. Mrs. Dawson appeared at the office door, her face tight with worry. "Your Grace, Sir Edmund is demanding to see you." "Then show him in," Caroline said calmly. "Your Grace, perhaps Mr. Henley should—" "Show him in, Mrs. Dawson." The housekeeper hesitated, then nodded and disappeared. Caroline took a slow breath, smoothed her skirts, and sat down behind the desk. Hugh's desk, technically, though he'd never sat in this chair, never worked at this wood, never looked out this window at the moors he owned but didn't care about. She folded her hands on the polished surface and waited. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door flew open. Sir Edmund filled the doorway, his face purple with rage. "You!" he snarled, jabbing a thick finger at her. "What in blazes do you think you're doing?" Caroline looked at him coolly. "Good afternoon, Sir Edmund. How kind of you to visit." "Don't play coy with me, girl. You're digging on my land." "I'm improving drainage on Greymoor land," Caroline corrected. "The ditch runs along the boundary, not across it." "It's on my property." "No, Sir Edmund, it's on the boundary line, as surveyed and recorded in—" "I don't give a damn about surveys." He slammed his fist on the desk, making the inkwell jump. "You think you can come here, a slip of a girl with no business managing anything more complicated than a parlor, and start tearing up property lines?" "Where's your husband? Where's the Duke?" Caroline didn't flinch. "The Duke has entrusted the management of Greymoor to me." "Has he?" Sir Edmund leaned forward, his breath reeking of brandy and tobacco. "Because from where I stand, it looks like he dumped you here and forgot you existed. And now you're running wild, pretending to be something you're not." The words hit harder than Caroline expected, cutting straight through her armor to the raw wound beneath. But she didn't let it show. "The work will continue," she said quietly. Sir Edmund's eyes bulged. "Like hell it will. I'll have the magistrates shut you down by sunset. I'll take this to the courts. I'll make sure every landowner in Yorkshire knows what kind of chaos you're creating." "Then do it," Caroline said, her voice deadly calm. "Take it to the magistrate. Take it to the courts. Let them examine the survey. Let them review the agricultural improvement laws. Let them decide." Sir Edmund stared at her, his face cycling through shades of red and purple. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, his voice dropping to something darker. "A mistake that's going to cost you more than you know." He turned and stormed out, his men scrambling to follow. Caroline sat very still, listening to the sound of horses galloping away. Then her hands began to shake. She pressed them flat against the desk, willing them to stop. The truth was, she wasn't sure she was right. The boundary was murky. The law could be interpreted multiple ways. And Sir Edmund had connections. Magistrates who'd rule in his favor just because she was a woman, judges who'd laugh her out of court. But she couldn't back down now. If she did, every tenant, every tradesman, every landholder in Yorkshire would know she could be bullied. That she was weak. That she was playing at authority she didn't really have. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, in the distance, she could see Barrow and his crew still working on the ditch. Small figures against the vast moor, digging into the earth with steady determination. They believed in her. She couldn't let them down. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Caroline's life. Sir Edmund made good on his threat. He went to the magistrate, a pinch-faced man named Mr. Hartwell, who made the 10-mile journey to Greymoor 3 days later, armed with legal documents and a skeptical frown. Caroline received him in the drawing room, served him tea she couldn't afford to waste, and calmly presented her case. She showed him the surveys, the agricultural improvement statutes, the calculations proving the ditch wouldn't harm Moorfield's property. She spoke clearly, precisely, using the legal language she'd spent the last 3 years learning from dusty books in the estate library. Mr. Hartwell listened, his expression giving nothing away. When she finished, he set down his teacup. "Your Grace," he said slowly, "you understand this is highly irregular." "I understand the law is being followed," Caroline replied. "The law, perhaps. But custom." He shook his head. "Sir Edmund is a respected landowner, a man of standing, and you are, forgive me, very young, very inexperienced, and very much alone here." "My age and experience don't change the facts." "No," Mr. Hartwell agreed. "But they do change how those facts will be received. If this goes to court, the judge will see a young woman acting without her husband's guidance, making decisions that could set dangerous precedents." Caroline's jaw tightened. Dangerous to whom? Mr. Hartwell had the grace to look uncomfortable. "To the natural order of things, Your Grace." There it was, the real reason. Not the law, not the facts, but the simple crushing weight of what people believed women should and shouldn't do. "What do you suggest?" Caroline asked, though she already knew. "Stop the work. Issue an apology to Sir Edmund. Let this matter rest." "No." Mr. Hartwell blinked. "Your Grace, the ditch is nearly complete. The field will be productive for the first time in a decade. My tenant will be able to feed his family. I will not apologize for doing my duty to this estate." "Then I'm afraid Sir Edmund will pursue legal action." "Let him." Mr. Hartwell stood, gathering his papers. "I hope you understand what you're risking, Your Grace. Your reputation, your husband's name, the goodwill of every landowner in the region." Caroline stood as well, her spine straight. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Hartwell." He left, shaking his head. That night, Caroline sat in her study and wrote a letter to Hugh. She'd never written to him before. He'd made it clear he didn't want her correspondence. But he needed to know what was happening. If Sir Edmund went to court, if the case became public, it would reflect on the Aldridge name. She kept it brief. "Your Grace, I am writing to inform you of a boundary dispute with Sir Edmund Moorfield regarding drainage improvements on Greymoor land. Sir Edmund has threatened legal action. I believe our position is sound, but I felt you should be aware before your visit. The estate is otherwise well. See Aldridge." She sealed it, sent it by express courier, and tried not to think about what Hugh would say when he received it. The response came 4 days later. Not a letter, a messenger. A young man in Aldridge livery appeared at the door, mud-splattered and exhausted, carrying a sealed envelope. Caroline took it to her study and broke the seal with trembling fingers. Hugh's handwriting was sharper than usual, the letters slashing across the page. "Stop the work immediately. Issue a formal apology to Sir Edmund. Do not engage in any further disputes. I will address this matter when I arrive. You are to take no further independent action regarding estate management. Aldridge." Caroline read it twice. Then she walked to the fireplace and burned it, just like the first letter. Because the work was already done. The ditch was finished, the field was draining, and she'd be damned if she'd apologize for making Greymoor better just because her husband couldn't bear the thought of her having authority. She sat down at her desk and wrote a single sentence. "The matter is resolved. The estate is productive. I stand by my decisions." She sent it back with the messenger and went to bed feeling both terrified and utterly, fiercely alive. Hugh arrived on a Thursday. Caroline was in the north pasture watching one of the tenant farmers demonstrate a new plowing technique when a stable boy came running across the field. "Your Grace," he gasped, out of breath. "The Duke's carriage! He's here!" Caroline's heart stopped. She looked down at herself, mud on her skirts, her hair coming loose from its pins, her hands dirty from examining soil samples. This was not how she'd planned to greet him. But there was no time to change. "Thank you," she told the boy, then turned to the farmer. "We'll continue this tomorrow." She walked back toward the house, her pulse hammering in her ears. The carriage was already in the courtyard, black and polished, the Aldridge crest gleaming. A driver and 2 footmen were unloading luggage. Mrs. Dawson was standing on the steps, looking flustered. And there, stepping down from the carriage, was Hugh. 3 years. 3 years since Caroline had seen him. He looked different, thinner. His face was leaner, the bones more prominent. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his skin had the pallor of someone who'd been seriously ill. But his eyes, those cold gray eyes, were the same. They found her across the courtyard. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Caroline felt time collapse. She was 20 again, standing in the drawing room of Aldridge House, hearing him tell her she was being sent away, feeling the floor drop out from under her world. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She straightened her shoulders and walked toward him. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady. "Welcome to Greymoor." Hugh's gaze moved over her, taking in the mud, the wind-blown hair, the calluses on her hands. "Caroline," he said. His voice was rougher than she remembered, hoarse, as if he'd been shouting or sick or both. "I hope your journey was pleasant," she said, falling back on the bland courtesies of polite society, because she had no idea what else to say. "It was long." He glanced at the house, then back at her. "We need to talk." "Of course. Perhaps you'd like to rest first, refresh yourself?" Now, he said. Caroline's jaw tightened, still giving orders, still acting as if 3 years of silence gave him the right to walk in and take control. Very well, she said. My study is this way. She led him inside, acutely aware of his presence behind her, the sound of his boots on the stone floor, the faint scent of travel and cold air clinging to his coat. They passed servants who bowed and curtsied, their eyes wide with curiosity. Caroline opened the door to the estate office and stepped inside. Hugh followed and closed the door behind them. The room suddenly felt very small. Caroline moved behind the desk, her desk, and waited. Hugh looked around the room, at the ledgers stacked neatly on the shelves, the maps pinned to the walls, the correspondence sorted in precise piles, the evidence of 3 years of work. You've been busy, he said. I've been managing the estate, Caroline replied. As you instructed. His eyes snapped to hers. I instructed you to live quietly and cause no trouble. No, Caroline said, her voice hardening. You instructed me to go away and be forgotten. I chose a different path. Hugh's jaw clenched. You chose to start a boundary dispute with one of the most influential landowners in Yorkshire. I chose to improve drainage on Greymoor land so that my tenants could farm productively. Your tenants? The question hung in the air like a blade. Caroline lifted her chin. Yes, my tenants, the people I've worked with for 3 years, the people whose livelihoods depend on this estate, the people you've never met and clearly don't care about. Hugh took a step forward. You don't know what I care about, don't I? Caroline laughed, and it was a bitter sound. You sent me here to disappear. You made it abundantly clear that you wanted nothing to do with me. And now you arrive angry that I dared to do more than sit in a corner and embroider pillowcases? I'm angry that you risked the Aldridge reputation on a petty drainage dispute. It's not petty to the family that depends on that field. It's not petty to the children who eat because their father can grow enough grain to sell. Caroline's voice rose despite herself. But of course you wouldn't understand that. You've never had to worry about where your next meal comes from. You've never had to fight for anything because everything was handed to you on a silver platter. Hugh's face went white. For a moment, Caroline thought he might shout back. Instead, he turned away, one hand braced on the window frame, looking out at the moors. You think I don't understand fighting, he said quietly. Caroline said nothing. You think I haven't had to claw my way through hell to get where I am? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then tell me, Caroline said. Tell me what happened. Tell me why you married me just to throw me away. Hugh was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, distant. I was engaged once before, he said, to a woman named Isabel Harcourt. We were young, in love, or what I thought was love. We were 2 weeks from the wedding when I found out the truth. Caroline waited. She'd been having an affair with my closest friend for months, laughing at me behind my back, planning to take my money and my name while she continued. He stopped. She died before I could confront her. A writing accident. Everyone called it tragic. I called it a mercy. Caroline's chest tightened. I swore I'd never be made a fool of again, Hugh continued. Never let emotion cloud judgment. Never marry for anything but practical reasons. He turned to look at her. You were a practical choice, Caroline. Your family needed money. I needed an heir eventually. It was supposed to be simple, clean, bloodless. So you exiled me, Caroline said. I protected myself. By treating me like I was her. Hugh flinched. I was 20 years old, Caroline said, her voice shaking now. I had done nothing to you, nothing, and you punished me for another woman's sins. You sent me away like I was garbage, like I didn't matter, like I was nothing. You weren't nothing. Then what was I? The question hung between them. Hugh opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer. Caroline felt something crack inside her, something that had been holding her together for 3 years. You want to know what I risked for that drainage ditch? She said. I risked being laughed at, being dismissed, being told I was too young, too female, too inexperienced to make decisions. I faced down magistrates and landowners and an entire community that thought I should sit quietly and wait for a man to come save me. And I did it because I had to, because if I didn't, if I let them win, then you would have been right. I would have been nothing. She moved around the desk to face him directly. So yes, I started a boundary dispute. Yes, I made decisions without your permission. And yes, I turned this estate from a neglected wasteland into something productive and profitable. Without you. Without anyone. Because you left me no choice. Hugh stared at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes besides coldness. Shock. Recognition. Maybe even regret. Caroline! A knock at the door interrupted him. Your Grace? Mrs. Dawson's voice, tight with urgency. I'm sorry, but there's a problem. Caroline crossed to the door and opened it. Mrs. Dawson looked pale. It's Barrow's youngest daughter. She's fallen ill. High fever. They've sent for the doctor, but... I'm coming, Caroline said immediately. She grabbed her cloak from the hook by the door. Hugh caught her arm. Caroline, we're not finished. No, she said, pulling free. We're not. But that little girl might be, if I don't go now. She left him standing in the office and ran for the stables. The Barrow cottage sat on the eastern edge of the estate, a small stone building with a thatched roof and a vegetable garden struggling against the rocky soil. Caroline had visited it dozens of times over the years, bringing medicine when the children were sick, helping with the harvest, sitting at the rough wooden table drinking tea and talking about crop rotations and weather patterns. She knew this family, these people. They were hers to protect. When she arrived, breathless and windblown, Mrs. Barrow met her at the door, her face streaked with tears. Your Grace, thank heaven, she's burning up. I don't know what to do. Show me, Caroline said. The girl, Lucy, 7 years old with her father's dark hair and her mother's gentle eyes, lay in a narrow bed in the corner, her small body shaking with fever. Her skin was gray, her breathing shallow and rapid. Caroline knelt beside the bed and pressed her hand to Lucy's forehead, burning hot. She'd seen this before, 2 winters ago, when fever swept through the village and took 3 children before the doctor could arrive. How long has she been like this? Caroline asked. Since this morning. Started with a cough yesterday, then Mrs. Barrow's voice broke. Caroline stood. Fetch me cold water, as much as you can, and clean cloths. While Mrs. Barrow ran to comply, Caroline stripped off her cloak and rolled up her sleeves. She'd learned basic nursing from the village women, the skills no Duchess was supposed to need, but that Caroline had absorbed anyway, filing them away alongside ledger-keeping and boundary law. Now she put them to use. She bathed Lucy's face and arms with cold water, trying to bring down the fever. She propped her up to help her breathe. She spoke to her in a low, steady voice, telling her stories about the moors, about the wild ponies that ran in the hills, about anything that might anchor the girl to consciousness. Hours passed. The doctor arrived, a gruff man named Dr. Morrison, who delivered half the babies in the county and had no patience for title or ceremony. He examined Lucy, his face grave. Pneumonia, he said finally. Worse than I'd like. She'll need constant care. The fever has to break, or... He didn't finish. Caroline nodded. I'll stay. Dr. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Your Grace, I'll stay, she repeated. And she did. All through the night, while Lucy fought for breath, and her parents kept vigil and the wind howled outside. Caroline bathed the girl's burning skin, forced water between her lips, held her when she thrashed. She didn't think about Hugh waiting back at the house. She didn't think about Sir Edmund or magistrates or reputation. She thought only about keeping this child alive. Somewhere near dawn, exhausted and aching, Caroline felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up. Hugh stood in the doorway of the cottage. He looked completely out of place. A duke in fine clothes standing in a tenant's cramped home, mud on his boots, his hair disheveled. What are you doing here? Caroline whispered. Mrs. Dawson told me where you'd gone. He looked at Lucy, then at Caroline. How long have you been here? I don't know. Hours. Hugh crossed to her side and knelt. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the shadows under his eyes. You should rest, he said. I can't leave her. You can, for a few hours. He glanced at the Barrows, huddled together in the corner. I'll stay. Caroline stared at him. You? I may not know much about estate management, Hugh said quietly, but I know how to keep a vigil. For a moment, Caroline wanted to refuse, Pride demanded it. But she was so tired, and Lucy needed someone alert, someone who could watch for changes, who could act quickly if the fever spiked again. "The fever," she started. "I'll watch for it. I'll call you if anything changes." Caroline looked at Lucy's small, pale face. Then she nodded and stood. Her legs nearly gave out. Hugh caught her elbow, steadying her. "Just a few hours," she said. "Just a few hours." Caroline let Mrs. Barrow lead her to a chair by the fire, wrapped her in a blanket, and closed her eyes. She fell asleep to the sound of Hugh's voice, low and steady, telling Lucy a story about a knight and a dragon and a girl who saved them both. Hugh was still there. Sitting beside the Hugh was still there. Sitting beside the bed, dark circles under his eyes, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a damp cloth in his hand. He looked up when Caroline approached. "The fever broke an hour ago," he said quietly. "Dr. Morrison says she'll live." Relief hit Caroline so hard she had to brace herself against the wall. "Thank you," she whispered. Hugh set down the cloth and stood. His eyes met hers, and for the first time in 3 years she saw something in them besides ice. Something warm. Something human. "You did this," he said. "Not me." They stood there in the dim cottage, looking at each other across a distance that felt both infinite and paper-thin. And Caroline realized something. The man who'd sent her away was still there, underneath. But so was someone else, someone who'd sat all night with a dying child, someone who might, maybe, be worth trying to understand. "We should talk," she said. Hugh nodded. "Yes, we should." But before either of them could say more, the cottage door burst open. A rider stood there, covered in mud, his horse heaving with exhaustion. "Your Grace," he gasped, looking at Caroline. "You need to come. Now." "What's happened?" "It's Sir Edmund. He's gathered men, armed men. They're marching on the drainage ditch. He says if you won't tear it down, he will." Caroline's blood ran cold. Hugh's hand went to her arm. "Stay here. I'll handle this." "No." Caroline was already moving, grabbing her cloak. "This is my fight." "Caroline," she turned to face him. "You can help me or you can stay out of my way, but I'm going." For a moment, Hugh looked like he might argue. Then something shifted in his expression. A decision made. "Then we go together," he said. And they ran for the horses. The horses thundered across the moors, their hooves kicking up mud and dead heather. Caroline leaned low over her mare's neck, the wind tearing at her hair, her heart pounding in rhythm with the drumbeat of hooves. Beside her, Hugh rode hard, his face set in grim determination. They didn't speak. There was no time for words. The drainage ditch was 2 miles south, cutting through the low valley where Greymoor land met Moorfield's boundary. As they crested the final ridge, Caroline saw them. 30 men. Maybe more. A ragged army of Sir Edmund's tenants and hired laborers, armed with shovels, pickaxes, and clubs. They surrounded the ditch like invaders claiming conquered territory. And at their center, mounted on a massive bay stallion, sat Sir Edmund himself. Caroline pulled her horse to a stop at the ridge's edge, breathing hard. Below, she could see Barrow and 6 other Greymoor tenants standing between the mob and the ditch. They held their ground, but they were vastly outnumbered. One man had a pitchfork, another gripped a spade like a weapon. They looked terrified but defiant. "Damn it," Hugh muttered beside her. "This is going to get bloody." "Not if I can help it," Caroline said. She urged her horse forward, down the slope toward the confrontation. Hugh swore and followed. The Greymoor men saw her coming. Relief flashed across Barrow's face, but it was quickly replaced by worry. Sir Edmund saw her too. His face twisted into something between a sneer and a grin. "Well, well," he called out as Caroline approached. "The little Duchess finally shows her face. Come to watch your illegal ditch get filled in?" Caroline brought her horse to a stop 20 feet from him, close enough to talk, far enough to retreat if things went wrong. "This ditch is legal," she said, her voice carrying across the valley. "It's on Greymoor land. You have no authority here." "I have the authority of common sense and tradition," Sir Edmund shot back, "and the right to protect my property from the whims of a foolish girl playing at estate management." "I'm not playing," Caroline said coldly. "I'm doing the job you've neglected on your own land. If you spent half as much time improving Moorfield as you do interfering with your neighbors, Maybe your tenants wouldn't be so desperate for work that they'd follow you into trespassing. A ripple of laughter came from the Greymore men. Sir Edmund's face darkened. You dare— I dare to tell the truth, Caroline interrupted. This ditch harms nothing but your pride. And if you fill it in, I will take you to court. I will drag you before every magistrate and judge in Yorkshire. I will make this so public, so ugly, that your name will be a joke from here to London. Empty threats from an empty-headed woman. Try me. They stared at each other across the torn earth. Then Hugh rode forward, placing his horse between Caroline and Sir Edmund. Enough, he said, his voice quiet but commanding. Sir Edmund, you're on my land with armed men. That's not a dispute. That's an invasion. Sir Edmund's eyes narrowed. Your Grace, I didn't realize you were in residence. Perhaps you're not aware of what your wife has been doing in your absence. I'm aware of everything, Hugh said flatly. I'm aware that she's improved this estate beyond anything I could have managed. I'm aware that she's acted within her legal rights. And I'm aware that you're threatening violence over a drainage ditch that doesn't affect you in any material way. It's the principle, Hugh said, his voice hardening, is that you're angry a woman outsmarted you. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not property lines, not tradition, just wounded pride. Sir Edmund's face went purple. How dare you? I dare because I'm a duke and you're a baronet, and unless you want me to make your life very difficult for the next decade, you'll take your men and leave. Now. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sir Edmund looked at Hugh, then at Caroline, then at his men, some of whom were already shifting uncomfortably. This isn't over, he said finally. Yes, Caroline said. It is. For a moment she thought Sir Edmund might charge. His hand tightened on his reins, his horse dancing sideways. But then one of his men, a younger tenant with more sense than loyalty, spoke up. Sir Edmund, maybe we should— Shut up, Sir Edmund snarled. But the spell was broken. The mob's energy was deflating, uncertainty creeping in. Sir Edmund wheeled his horse around. You'll regret this, he spat at Caroline. Both of you. He kicked his horse into a gallop. His men followed, a disorganized retreat back toward Moorfield land. Caroline watched them go, her whole body shaking with adrenaline. When the last man had disappeared over the ridge, Barrow let out a long breath. Your Grace, he said, looking at Caroline with something like awe. That was reckless, Hugh finished, turning his horse to face her. His face was pale, his jaw tight. That was incredibly reckless. If he'd attacked— But he didn't, Caroline said. But he could have. What would you have had me do? Caroline's voice rose. Hide at the house? Let him destroy work my tenants spent days completing? Let him think he could bully Greymore into submission? I would have had you let me handle it. Why? So you could negotiate away something I built? So you could make a gentleman's agreement that preserves everyone's pride at the cost of my authority? Caroline's hands were shaking on the reins. This is my estate, Hugh, mine. I've earned that right. This is my estate, Hugh said, his voice dangerously quiet. You're managing it. There's a difference. The words landed like a physical blow. Caroline felt something inside her chest crack open. Is that what you think? She said. After everything, after 3 years, you still think I'm just your steward, your employee? Hugh's expression flickered. Caroline, I didn't mean— Yes, you did. She turned her horse sharply. Barrow, post guards on the ditch tonight. 2 men, rotating shifts. If Sir Edmund returns, send word immediately. Yes, Your Grace. Caroline kicked her horse into a gallop before Hugh could say another word. She rode hard, not back to the house, but east, toward the wildest part of the moors, where the land rose in rocky tors and the wind screamed across bare stone. She needed space, distance, something other than the suffocating weight of Hugh's presence and his words echoing in her mind. This is my estate. Of course it was. Legally, financially, in every way that mattered to the law and society. But she'd given it 3 years of her life, her blood, her sweat, her tears. She'd transformed it from a neglected wasteland into something thriving. Didn't that count for anything? She reached the highest tor and dismounted, her legs unsteady. The view from here was staggering. The moors stretched endlessly in every direction, rolling hills of heather and stone under a sky so vast it made her feel like an insect. In the distance, she could see Greymore, her fortress, her kingdom, her prison. "Caroline?" She turned. Hugh was riding up the slope, his horse laboring against the steep incline. Caroline considered mounting up and riding away again, but she was tired of running. Hugh reached the tor and dismounted. His hair was windblown, his elegant clothes streaked with mud. He looked nothing like the cold, composed Duke who'd sent her away 3 years ago. He looked human, flawed, lost. "I'm sorry," he said. Caroline stared at him. "What?" "I'm sorry. What I said about the estate, I didn't mean it the way it came out." He took a step toward her. "You're right, you've built this. Not me. I had no right to diminish that." Caroline felt her anger waver, then harden again. "But you meant what you said. This is your estate. I'm here at your pleasure. You could take it all away tomorrow if you wanted." Hugh was silent for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "Legally, I could." "Then what are we even doing here?" Caroline's voice cracked. "What was the point of any of this?" "I don't know," Hugh said, and the honesty in his voice shocked her. "I sent you here to be forgotten, to be contained, out of sight, out of mind. I thought that would be enough, that I could go on living my life, keeping my distance, never having to risk feeling anything again. And now?" Hugh ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so uncharacteristically disheveled that Caroline almost didn't recognize him. "Now I realize I was a coward," he said. "I was so afraid of being hurt again that I destroyed something before it even had a chance to exist. I punished you for Isabel's sins. I convinced myself I was protecting us both, but really I was just protecting myself." Caroline wrapped her arms around herself against the wind. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I almost died." The words came out flat, matter of fact. 6 months ago, in Vienna. Fever. The doctors said I had maybe days. I lay in that bed thinking about all the things I'd done wrong, all the people I'd hurt, and your face kept appearing. You standing in our wedding chamber, trying so hard to be brave. You reading my letter of exile. And I realized... His voice broke. I realized I'd thrown away something precious without ever knowing what it was. Caroline felt tears sting her eyes. "So you came back?" "So I came back." He took another step toward her. Not to reclaim anything, not to take control, but to see what I'd lost. To see if there was any way to make amends for what I did to you. "You can't," Caroline said. "You can't undo 3 years of exile. You can't erase the loneliness, the humiliation, the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering what I'd done wrong." "I know. You broke me, Hugh. You took a frightened girl and you broke her into pieces." "I know," Hugh said again, his voice rough with emotion. "And I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. But Caroline..." He gestured toward Greymore in the distance. "You didn't stay broken. You built yourself into something stronger than I ever was. You became someone extraordinary, and I..." He stopped, struggling for words. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one anyway." Caroline looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd arrived. She saw the illness that had ravaged him, the exhaustion, the fear poorly hidden behind ducal composure. And she saw something else, regret. Real, honest regret. It didn't fix anything. It didn't undo the damage, but it was something. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly. "I don't know if I even want to try." Hugh nodded slowly. "I understand." "But..." Caroline took a breath. "I'm willing to see if we can build something new. Not what we were supposed to have. Not some fantasy of a perfect marriage. But maybe a partnership between equals." Hugh's eyes widened slightly. "Equals? If you can't see me as an equal after everything I've accomplished here, then this conversation is over." For a long moment, Hugh said nothing. Then he did something Caroline never expected. He knelt. Right there on the rocky tor in the mud and heather, the Duke of Thornborough knelt before his wife. "I see you," he said, looking up at her. I see what you've built. I see your strength, your intelligence, your courage. And I swear to you, Caroline, if you give me a chance, I will spend every day trying to be worthy of standing beside you. Not above you, beside you. Caroline's heart hammered against her ribs. This was everything she'd wanted, everything she'd fought for. Recognition, respect, partnership. But was it real? Or just pretty words from a man who'd learned how to get what he wanted? Before she could answer, a shout echoed across the moors. They both turned. A rider was galloping toward them, waving frantically. It was one of the Greymore stable boys, his face pale with panic. "Your Grace!" he screamed as he got closer. "Your Grace, come quick!" Hugh stood. "What's happened?" The boy reached them, his horse heaving. "It's the house, fire, Sir Edmund." Caroline's blood turned to ice. "What?" "Sir Edmund and his men, they circled back. They've set fire to the south wing." Caroline didn't wait to hear more. She was on her horse and riding before the boy finished speaking. Hugh was right behind her. They rode like demons across the moors, the horses straining, hooves pounding. As they crested the final ridge, Caroline saw it. Smoke. Black, thick smoke billowing from Greymoor's south wing, where the servants' quarters and storage rooms were located. Flames licked from the windows, orange and hungry. People were running in the courtyard. Servants with buckets, tenants with shovels, everyone trying desperately to fight the blaze. Caroline's mind went blank with rage and fear. Sir Edmund had done this. That bastard had actually done this. She drove her horse harder, faster, until they reached the courtyard and she practically threw herself from the saddle. Mrs. Dawson grabbed her. "Your Grace, thank heaven, we're trying to contain it, but it's spreading." "Is everyone out?" Caroline demanded. "We think so, but we can't be sure. The smoke is so thick." "Where's the bucket line?" "We're trying, but there's not enough water." Caroline looked around wildly. The well in the courtyard, the water troughs, not enough, not nearly enough. But the stream that ran 100 yards east of the house, fed by moorland springs, cold and fast-moving. "We need to divert the stream," she said. Hugh appeared at her side. "What?" "The stream. If we can channel it toward the house, create a water source closer." "That'll take hours we don't have," Hugh said, looking at the flames. "Then we'd better start now." Caroline started shouting orders. "Barrow, take 10 men and shovels, dig a channel from the stream to the courtyard. Mr. Henley, organize bucket lines from the stream, not the well. Mrs. Dawson, check every room one more time. I want confirmation that everyone is out." People scattered, moving to obey. Hugh grabbed her arm. "Caroline, the whole wing could collapse. Then we save what we can." She pulled free and ran toward the bucket line, forming at the stream. The next hour was chaos. Smoke choked the air. Heat pressed against Caroline's face until her skin felt like it would blister. Her dress was soaked with water and sweat, her hands raw from hauling buckets. The men dug frantically at the stream bank, trying to cut a channel through earth and rock. Water trickled, then flowed, then poured toward the house as they widened the breach. The bucket lines worked in desperate rhythm, fill, pass, throw, repeat. Over and over until Caroline's arms screamed and her lungs burned. Hugh was beside her the entire time, hauling water, directing men, his fine clothes ruined, his face streaked with soot. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, they began to gain ground. The flames in the south wing started to shrink. The smoke thinned. And then, just as Caroline thought they might actually save the house, she heard the scream. "Someone's inside!" Caroline's head snapped up. One of the maids, Eliza, the girl who'd served her tea on her wedding night, stood in the courtyard sobbing. "It's Jenny! She went back for her things. She's still in there." Caroline's world stopped. Jenny. 15 years old, a scullery maid, sweet-faced and terrified of her own shadow. She was still inside. "Where?" Caroline demanded. "Third floor, the servants' quarters." Caroline was already running. "Caroline, no!" Hugh's voice, sharp with panic. But she didn't stop. She hit the front door at a sprint, smoke engulfing her immediately. The entrance hall was thick with it, gray and choking. She pulled her shawl over her mouth and nose and kept going. The stairs. She could barely see them through the smoke, but she knew this house. Every step, every turn. She'd walked these halls 1,000 times. She climbed, coughing, her eyes streaming. Second floor. The smoke was worse here, heat pressing down from above. Third floor. The servants' quarters were an inferno. Flames crawled along the walls, eating through old wood and plaster. "Jenny!" Caroline screamed. A weak cry answered. "Help!" Caroline followed the sound, ducking low where the air was slightly clearer. There. In the corner room, huddled beneath a window, was Jenny, curled into a ball, sobbing, surrounded by smoke. Caroline lunged through the doorway. The heat was unbearable. The ceiling groaned ominously. "Jenny, we have to go. Now!" The girl looked up, her face streaked with tears and soot. "I can't. I'm scared." "I know, but I'm here. Come on." Caroline grabbed Jenny's arm and hauled her up. They made it 3 steps before the ceiling collapsed. Not the whole thing, just a section, but enough. Burning timbers crashed down between them and the door, blocking their escape. Caroline's heart stopped. They were trapped. "No, no, no!" Jenny was crying, clinging to Caroline. Caroline looked around desperately. The window. It was small, barely large enough for a person to fit through, and they were 3 stories up. But it was the only option. She dragged Jenny to the window and threw it open. Cold air rushed in, feeding the flames behind them. Below, she could see people in the courtyard, tiny figures pointing up at them. "We have to jump," Caroline said. Jenny shook her head frantically. "I can't." "You can. Look, they're bringing something." Below, men were dragging what looked like an old cart cover, heavy canvas, strong enough to catch them if they aimed right. If. "Jenny, listen to me." Caroline gripped the girl's shoulders. "When I say jump, you jump. Don't think. Just do it. Understand?" Jenny nodded, terrified. Caroline looked down. The men had the canvas stretched tight, 4 men on each corner. Hugh was one of them, his face tilted up, his eyes locked on hers. "On 3, he shouted. Caroline pushed Jenny to the window. "Go!" "But go!" Jenny jumped. Caroline watched her fall, watched the canvas catch her, watched the men lower her safely to the ground. Relief flooded through her. Then the floor beneath her feet gave way. She fell. Not far. Just a few feet into the room below, but hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. She lay there, stunned, smoke filling her vision. Above her, through the hole she'd fallen through, she could see flames spreading. She tried to move. Her ankle screamed in protest, twisted, maybe broken. Panic clawed at her throat. She was going to die here, in the house she'd rebuilt, the house she'd fought for. After everything, this was how it ended. Then she heard footsteps, heavy, running footsteps. And then Hugh was there, dropping through the hole after her, landing in a crouch. "You stupid, brave, impossible woman," he gasped. He scooped her up like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. "Hold on," he said. And he ran, through the smoke, through the flames, down stairs that groaned and buckled beneath them. Caroline buried her face in his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat hammering against her ear. They burst through the front door into cold, clean air. People rushed toward them, servants, tenants, everyone talking at once. Hugh carried her to the fountain in the courtyard and set her down gently on the edge. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands frantically checking her for injuries. "My ankle," Caroline managed. "I think it's—" Dr. Morrison appeared, pushing through the crowd. "Let me see." While the doctor examined her ankle, Caroline looked back at the house. The south wing was destroyed. Charred stone, collapsed roof, smoke still rising. But the rest was standing. They'd saved it. "Sprained badly," Dr. Morrison announced, "but not broken. You'll be off it for a few weeks." Caroline barely heard him. She was looking at Hugh, who was still kneeling beside her, his face black with soot, his eyes red-rimmed. "You came after me," she said. "Of course I did." "You could have died." Hugh's laugh was shaky. "So could you. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed." "I couldn't leave her." "I know." Hugh took her hand, his fingers trembling. "That's why I'm fairly certain I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Caroline stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "I love you," Hugh said again, stronger this time. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe watching you face down Sir Edmund. Maybe listening to you argue estate law with magistrates. Maybe seeing you transform this place into something magnificent. Or maybe, he swallowed hard, maybe it was always there, buried under fear and stupidity, waiting for me to be brave enough to see it. Caroline couldn't breathe. You don't have to say anything, Hugh continued quickly. I know I don't deserve— Hugh, Caroline interrupted. He stopped. She reached up with her free hand and touched his face, leaving a smudge of soot on his cheek. Ask me again, she said. In a month, when the house is repaired and my ankle is healed and we've both had time to think clearly, ask me then if we can build something real, and I'll give you my answer. Hugh's eyes searched hers. Is that a yes? It's a maybe, Caroline said, which is more than you had this morning. A smile broke across Hugh's face, the first real smile she'd ever seen from him. And despite everything, despite the ruined wing and her throbbing ankle and the exhaustion dragging at her bones, Caroline found herself smiling back. Then Mrs. Dawson's voice cut through the moment. Your Grace, both of you, you need to see this. They turned. The housekeeper was standing at the edge of the courtyard, holding something, a torch, still burning. We found this in the south wing, she said, her voice shaking. And this, she held up a piece of cloth, expensive wool, embroidered with initials. E.M. Edmund Moorfield. The crowd went silent. Caroline felt rage, cold and sharp, cut through her exhaustion. He did this, she said. He actually burned down part of my house. Our house, Hugh corrected quietly. Then, louder to the assembled crowd. Everyone who saw Sir Edmund or his men near the house before the fire. I need you to speak up now. 3 tenants stepped forward, then 4, then 7. They'd all seen Sir Edmund's men circling the property, seen them throw something through the south wing windows, seen them ride away laughing. Hugh's face went cold, the coldest Caroline had ever seen it. That's not a boundary dispute anymore, he said. That's arson. That's attempted murder. He turned to one of the grooms. Ride to the magistrate. Tell him what happened. Tell him I'm pressing full charges against Sir Edmund Moorfield. Your Grace, are you certain? Mr. Henley asked nervously. If we accuse a man of his standing— I'm certain, Hugh said flatly. He nearly killed my wife. He nearly killed a 15-year-old girl. I don't care about his standing. I care about justice. Caroline looked at him, and something shifted in her chest. This was the man she'd needed 3 years ago. Better late than never. The groom rode off into the gathering dusk, and Caroline, sitting on the fountain's edge with her sprained ankle and soot-stained dress, looked at the crowd of people surrounding her people who'd fought beside her to save the house, and felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Like she belonged. Like she was home. The magistrate arrived at dawn. Caroline hadn't slept. Her ankle throbbed despite Dr. Morrison's ministrations, and every time she closed her eyes she saw flames, felt the floor giving way beneath her feet, heard Jenny's terrified screams. So she'd sat in the library, one of the few rooms untouched by smoke, with her injured foot propped on a cushion, watching the first gray light creep across the moors. Hugh had stayed with her through the night, sitting in the chair across from hers, sometimes talking, sometimes silent. He'd changed out of his ruined clothes into something borrowed from the estate steward. The garments hung slightly wrong on his frame, making him look less like a duke and more like a man. It was strange seeing him like this, stripped of London polish, human. When the knock came at the front door, they both straightened. Mrs. Dawson appeared moments later. Your Grace, Mr. Hartwell is here, and he's brought the constable. Caroline and Hugh exchanged glances. Show them in, Caroline said. Mr. Hartwell entered first, his pinched face even more severe than usual. Behind him came Constable Webb, a solid man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a reputation for fairness. Your Grace! Your Grace! Mr. Hartwell bowed to each of them in turn. I came as soon as I received word. This is a serious accusation you're making. It's a serious crime that was committed, Hugh said coldly. Arson, attempted murder, destruction of property. I don't make accusations lightly, Mr. Hartwell. Nevertheless, Sir Edmund Moorfield is a respected landowner, a man of standing. To accuse him of such acts without irrefutable proof— We have proof, Caroline interrupted. She gestured to the side table where Mrs. Dawson had laid out the evidence, the torch, the monogrammed cloth, written statements from 7 witnesses. Constable Webb moved to examine them. his expression carefully neutral. Mr. Hartwell remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. Your Grace, I must counsel caution. Even if Sir Edmund's men were involved, proving his direct knowledge or authorization will be extraordinarily difficult. And if this goes to trial, it will, Hugh said. I'm not interested in quiet settlements or gentlemen's agreements. He tried to kill my wife. That demands a legal response. Mr. Hartwell's mouth tightened. The courts may not see it that way. They may view this as an unfortunate escalation of a boundary dispute. Destruction of property, yes, but murder? That requires intent. 7 people saw his men throw torches through the windows while servants were still inside, Caroline said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. What would you call that? I would call it a matter for careful consideration and proper legal channels. Mr. Hartwell turned to Constable Webb. What is your assessment? Webb set down the last witness statement and looked up. Evidence is strong. Multiple witnesses, physical proof, clear timeline. I'll need to question Sir Edmund, of course, and his men. But if their stories don't align with the witnesses, he paused. This could go very badly for him. Good, Hugh said. Mr. Hartwell's expression soured. Your Grace, I strongly advise— I don't want your advice, Hugh said flatly. I want justice. Constable Webb, you have my full cooperation and the cooperation of everyone at Greymore. Whatever you need, you'll have it. Webb nodded slowly. I'll ride to Moorfield this morning, see what Sir Edmund has to say for himself. And if he refuses to cooperate, Caroline asked, then I'll get a warrant. Webb's eyes were hard. One way or another, we'll get to the truth. After the constable left, Mr. Hartwell lingered, clearly uncomfortable. Your Grace, he said to Hugh, I hope you understand the position this puts you in. The social ramifications— I don't care about social ramifications, Hugh said. My wife nearly died. A girl of 15 nearly burned alive. If society has a problem with me seeking justice for that, then society can go to hell. Mr. Hartwell's eyes widened. He looked at Caroline as if expecting her to moderate her husband's stance. Caroline smiled coldly. You heard the Duke, Mr. Hartwell? Was there anything else? The magistrate left shortly after, muttering about propriety and procedure. When the door closed behind him, Caroline let out a long breath. That went better than I expected, she said. Hugh moved to sit on the arm of her chair, careful not to jostle her injured foot. You thought I'd back down. I thought you might soften the approach, for the sake of reputation. My reputation was built on being cold and untouchable, Hugh said quietly. I'm tired of it, and if burning it down means protecting you, then so be it. Caroline looked up at him, searching his face for signs of doubt or calculation. She found none. Thank you, she said. Hugh's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with surprising gentleness. You don't need to thank me for doing what should have been done from the beginning. Before Caroline could respond, the sound of horses filled the courtyard. They both tensed, but it wasn't Sir Edmund returning. It was something Caroline hadn't expected. Tenants. Dozens of them. She hobbled to the window, Hugh supporting her weight, and stared out at the gathering crowd. Families she recognized, the Barrows, the Hutchinsons, the Prices, others she knew by face, if not by name. They filled the courtyard, some on horseback, most on foot, all looking up at the house with grim determination. Thomas Barrow stepped forward, his hat in his hands. Your Grace, he called. We heard what happened. We came to help. Caroline's throat tightened. Hugh opened the window. The fire's out, he called down. But thank you. Not help with the fire, Barrow interrupted. Help with what comes next. Sir Edmund's not going to take this lying down. When the constable questions him, when he realizes you're serious about pressing charges, he'll fight back. And he's got friends, Your Grace. Powerful friends. We know, Caroline said, leaning out beside Hugh. Then you know you'll need allies. Barrow looked around at the assembled crowd. We're not much, just farmers and tenants, but we're willing to stand with you, testify if needed, provide support, whatever it takes. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Caroline felt something crack open in her chest, something warm and fierce and entirely unexpected. These people, her people, standing in the cold morning air, offering their support against a man who could destroy their livelihoods with a word. For her. I can't ask you to risk yourselves, she said, her voice thick. Sir Edmund could make your lives very difficult. You didn't ask, a woman's voice called out. Mrs. Hutchinson, a farmer's wife, with 4 children and a spine of iron. We're offering. You've done right by us these 3 years, Your Grace. Time we return the favor. More voices joined in. Agreements, pledges of support. Caroline looked at Hugh. He was staring at the crowd with something like wonder on his face. I've never had this, he said quietly, just to her. Loyalty that wasn't bought or coerced, just freely given. Neither had I, Caroline whispered, until I came here. Hugh squeezed her hand, then called down to the crowd. Thank you, all of you. Your support means more than you know. But I want to be clear, this could get ugly. Sir Edmund will use every advantage he has. If you want to withdraw, no one will think less of you. We're not withdrawing, Barrow said firmly. You're our Duke and Duchess. That means something. The crowd dispersed slowly after that, but the message was clear. Graymore stood together, and for the first time since the fire, Caroline felt something other than rage and fear. She felt hope. Constable Webb returned that afternoon with news. Caroline received him in the library again, her ankles still elevated, Hugh standing behind her chair like a sentinel. Webb's face was grim. I questioned Sir Edmund, and several of his men. And? Hugh prompted. Sir Edmund denies everything, claims he was at home all evening, nowhere near Graymore. Says the witnesses are lying to protect their landlord. Caroline's hands clenched. And his men? Most told the same story, but 2... Webb pulled out a notebook. 2 men, younger fellows, seemed nervous. Their stories didn't quite match the others. I pressed them, and one finally admitted they'd been near Graymore that evening. Said Sir Edmund sent them to deliver a message about the drainage dispute. A message, Hugh repeated, his voice dangerous. His words, not mine. When I asked what kind of message, he clammed up. Wouldn't say more without a solicitor present. Webb closed the notebook. But it's enough for me to continue the investigation. I've requested statements from all of Sir Edmund's household staff. Someone knows something. How long will this take? Caroline asked. Weeks, possibly. Maybe longer if it goes to trial. Webb looked at her sympathetically. I know it's not the quick resolution you wanted, Your Grace, but these things take time. After Webb left, Caroline stared at the cold fireplace, frustration building in her chest. Weeks, she muttered. He nearly burns down our house, nearly kills people, and we have to wait weeks for justice. Hugh moved to sit across from her. The law moves slowly, but it does move. Not fast enough. No, Hugh agreed. But Caroline, there's something else we should discuss. She looked at him warily. What? Your safety. Sir Edmund knows the investigation is progressing. If he feels cornered, Hugh's jaw tightened. Desperate men do desperate things. I think you should leave Graymore temporarily. Come to London with me, until this is resolved. Caroline stared at him. Are you serious? Completely. If something happened to you because I wasn't cautious enough, no. Caroline's voice was flat. Absolutely not. Caroline, I'm not leaving. She leaned forward, ignoring the twinge in her ankle. This is my home. I fought for every inch of it. I'm not abandoning it because Sir Edmund is a vindictive bastard who can't accept that a woman outsmarted him. It's not about abandonment, it's about strategy. If you're in London, you're safe. You can coordinate the legal response from there. And everyone in Yorkshire will say I ran away. Caroline shook her head. No, I stay. I face this. And I win. Hugh looked at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. What? Caroline demanded. I just realized something, Hugh said. You're the bravest person I've ever met. Also the most stubborn. It's a terrifying combination. Despite everything, Caroline felt her lips twitch. You're only noticing this now? I'm a slow learner. Hugh's smile faded. But I'm serious about the danger. If you won't leave, then I'm hiring guards, men who can watch the house, the grounds. No arguments. Caroline wanted to protest, but the memory of flames, of falling, of Jenny's screams was too fresh. Fine, she said, but I choose them. Local men. People I trust. Agreed. They shook on it, and Caroline felt something shift between them again. Not quite partnership, not yet, but closer. A negotiation between equals rather than an order from master to servant. It was progress. The guards arrived 2 days later, 6 men from neighboring estates, recommended by Barrow as reliable and discreet. They took up positions around Greymore, watching the roads, the boundaries, the vulnerable points. Caroline hated needing them, hated the reminder that she wasn't safe in her own home, but she couldn't deny the relief she felt, knowing someone was watching. Meanwhile, Dr. Morrison declared her ankle improved enough for limited walking. Caroline immediately took advantage, hobbling through the house to assess the fire damage. The south wing was worse than she'd thought. The entire third floor was destroyed, the second floor badly damaged. Servants' quarters, storage rooms, the old armory, all gone. The estimate for repairs was staggering. Hugh found her standing in the ruined hallway, staring at the charred beams and collapsed ceiling. "We can rebuild," he said quietly. "With what money?" Caroline gestured at the destruction. "This will cost thousands. The estate is profitable, but not profitable enough to absorb this kind of loss." "I have money." "That's your money, your London accounts." Hugh moved to stand beside her. "Caroline, everything I have is legally yours as well. You're my wife." "In name only, remember? That was the agreement." Hugh flinched. That was a different time, different circumstances." "Was it?" Caroline turned to look at him. "Because legally, nothing has changed. I still have no access to your accounts, no control over your assets. If you decided tomorrow that you wanted me gone, I'd leave with nothing but what you chose to give me." "I would never—" "You already did." The words came out sharper than Caroline intended. 3 years ago, you sent me away with an allowance and orders not to bother you. What's to stop you from doing it again?" Hugh's face went pale. "Caroline, I swear to you." "Swear what? That you've changed? That you love me?" Caroline laughed bitterly. "You said those words in the heat of the moment, Hugh, after nearly dying in a fire. People say a lot of things when they're emotional. It doesn't mean they're true." "It is true." Hugh grabbed her shoulders gently, forcing her to look at him. "I know I don't deserve your trust. I know I've given you every reason to doubt me. But I meant what I said. I love you, and I want to prove it. Words are easy." "Then let me show you." Hugh released her and stepped back. "I'll have my solicitor draw up papers. Legal documents transferring joint ownership of Greymore to you, not as a courtesy, not as an allowance, as actual irrevocable ownership. Half of this estate will be yours, Caroline, yours to keep, regardless of what happens between us." Caroline stared at him. "You're serious?" "Completely. And I'll set up accounts in your name, London accounts, money that's yours to manage, invest, or spend as you see fit." His eyes were intense, urgent. "I can't undo the past, but I can make sure you're never powerless again." Caroline felt her throat tighten. This was what she'd wanted: security, independence, proof that she wasn't just a decorative wife to be discarded when convenient, but it was also terrifying, because if Hugh did this, if he gave her actual power, then she'd have to decide what to do with it, and with him. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Hugh nodded, disappointment flickering across his face before he schooled it away. "That's all I ask." "Your Grace, there's a young woman here to see you." "Your Grace, there's a young woman here to see you. Says her name is Margaret Thorne. She works at Moorfield." Caroline's head snapped up. "Send her in." The girl who entered was perhaps 17, slight and nervous, twisting her hands in her apron. Her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying. "Your Grace," she said, bobbing an awkward curtsy, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I needed to talk to someone about the fire." Caroline gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. Tell me what you know." Margaret perched on the edge of the seat, looking like she might bolt at any moment. "I work in Sir Edmund's kitchen," she said. "I've been there 2 years. And the night of the fire, I heard things." Caroline leaned forward. "What things?" "Sir Edmund and his men. They were drinking in the study. I was bringing wine, and I heard Sir Edmund say—" She swallowed hard. "He said the drainage ditch was just the beginning, that you needed to be taught a lesson. that uppity women who forgot their place needed to be reminded of what happened when they overstepped. Caroline's blood ran cold. One of the men asked what he meant, and Sir Edmund laughed, said fire was a wonderful teacher, that you'd learn humility when you watched everything you built burn. The girl's voice shook. I didn't think he meant it. I thought it was just talk, the way men talk when they're drunk. But then the next day when I heard about the fire, tears spilled down her cheeks. I couldn't stay quiet. It's not right. You've been good to people. My cousin works at Greymore. She says you're fair, that you care. And Sir Edmund... She stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Sir Edmund what? Caroline prompted gently. He's not a good man, Your Grace. He's cruel to his servants, cruel to his tenants. Everyone's afraid of him, but no one speaks up because he's powerful, and we're not. Margaret looked up, her eyes fierce despite the tears. But maybe if I speak up, if I tell what I heard, maybe it'll matter. Maybe someone will finally listen. Caroline felt something fierce and bright ignite in her chest. It will matter, she said. Margaret, would you be willing to tell this to Constable Webb, to make an official statement? The girl paled. Sir Edmund will know it was me. He won't touch you, Caroline interrupted. I promise you that. You can stay here at Greymore. We'll find you work, give you a room. You'll be under our protection. But my family, we'll protect them too if needed, whatever it takes. Caroline reached across the desk and took the girl's trembling hand. You're very brave, Margaret, and I swear to you, your courage won't be wasted. Hugh, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. I'll send word to Webb immediately, and I'll speak to my solicitor about witness protection. No one intimidates people under Aldridge protection. Margaret looked between them, hope and fear warring on her face. Finally, she nodded. I'll do it. I'll testify. Constable Webb took Margaret's statement that afternoon. By evening, he'd arrested 2 of Sir Edmund's men, the ones who'd been nervous during the initial questioning. Faced with Margaret's testimony and physical evidence, both men broke. They confirmed everything. Sir Edmund had ordered the fire, had provided the torches, had promised them extra pay if they sent a message the Duchess wouldn't forget. Webb arrested Sir Edmund the next morning. The news spread through Yorkshire like wildfire. A baronet, arrested for arson and attempted murder. It was unprecedented, scandalous, the kind of story that would be told for years. Caroline heard about it from Barrow, who rode to the house at full gallop to deliver the news personally. They took him in irons, Your Grace, Barrow said, grinning widely. Right out of his own house. He was shouting about injustice and demanding his solicitor, but Webb didn't budge, said the evidence was overwhelming. Caroline sat very still, absorbing the information. It was over. Not the legal proceedings. Those would take months, possibly years. But the immediate threat was gone. Sir Edmund was in custody. His men were talking. The truth was coming out. She'd won. Your Grace? Barrow's voice was concerned. Are you all right? Caroline realized she was crying. Not from sadness, from relief so profound it felt like a physical weight lifting off her chest. I'm fine, she managed. Thank you for bringing the news. After Barrow left, Hugh found her in the library, staring out at the moors. I heard, he said quietly. Caroline nodded. Hugh moved to stand beside her. How do you feel? Strange, Caroline said. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, but mostly I just feel tired. You've been fighting for 3 years, Hugh said, against isolation, against prejudice, against men who thought you had no business managing anything. You're allowed to be tired. Caroline leaned against the window frame. Outside, the moors stretched endlessly under a gray sky. Her moors, her kingdom. What happens now? She asked. Now you decide, Hugh said, what you want, what kind of life you want to build. Caroline turned to look at him. And if I decide I want to stay here, make Greymore my permanent home, then we stay here. What about London? Your duties, your seat in Parliament? Hugh shrugged. London will survive without me, and my duties can be managed from Yorkshire for the most part. The important ones, anyway. You'd give up London? For this place? I'd give up anything, Hugh said quietly. For you. The words hung between them. Caroline wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this wasn't just guilt or obligation or the remnants of fear from his illness. But trust was a fragile thing, and hers had been broken too thoroughly to heal overnight. "Ask me again in a month," she said, echoing her words from after the fire. "When the legal proceedings are underway and things have settled, when you've had time to think about what giving up London really means." Hugh's eyes searched hers. "And if I ask again then? If I still mean it?" Caroline smiled, and for the first time in days it felt genuine. "Then maybe I'll say yes." Toast. Slowly through the house, trailing her slowly through the house, trailing her fingers along walls she'd repaired, looking into rooms she'd furnished, remembering every battle she'd fought to make this place a home. She ended up in the south wing, or what remained of it. The smell of smoke still lingered, charred wood and stone, open to the sky where the roof had collapsed. But standing there in the ruins, Caroline didn't see destruction. She saw possibility. "We'll rebuild it," Hugh's voice said behind her. She turned. He stood in the doorway, also unable to sleep apparently, wearing a borrowed dressing gown that was too short in the sleeves. "Bigger," Caroline said. "Better. With proper fire protection this time. And quarters for the servants that aren't cramped and dark." Hugh moved to stand beside her, looking up at the skeletal remains of the third floor. "Whatever you want." "A library?" Caroline continued, ideas flowing now. "A real one. Not just a room with books, but a proper library where the tenant children can come to learn. And a school, maybe. Something small to start, but—" "Caroline," Hugh interrupted gently. She looked at him. "You don't have to convince me," he said. "If you want to build a library and a school and a monument to your victory over Sir Edmund, I'll support it. This is your estate, your vision." "Our estate," Caroline corrected. "If we're doing this, if we're really trying to build something together, then it has to be ours. Equal partners." Hugh's eyes brightened. "Equal partners?" "I'm not promising anything," Caroline said quickly. "I'm just considering it as a possibility." "I'll take a possibility," Hugh said. They stood together in the ruins, looking at what had been destroyed and imagining what could be built in its place. And for the first time since Hugh had arrived at Greymoor, Caroline felt like they were looking in the same direction, toward a future that might, just might, be worth fighting for. Together. The month that followed moved like water through stone, slowly, relentlessly, carving new channels through everything Caroline had thought solid and unchangeable. The legal proceedings against Sir Edmund began. His solicitors tried every trick they knew, delays, procedural challenges, appeals to social standing. But Margaret Thorne's testimony, combined with the confessions of Sir Edmund's men and the physical evidence, formed a wall too solid to break through. The trial was set for late spring at the York Assize. Meanwhile, Greymoor transformed. The repairs to the south wing began immediately. Hugh had brought in architects from London, not to impose their vision, but to translate Caroline's ideas into reality. The new wing would have proper servants' quarters, spacious and well lit, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves and large windows facing the moors, and a small schoolroom where tenant children could learn their letters. "You're building a legacy," Hugh said one morning, watching Caroline review plans with the head architect. She looked up from the drawings. "I'm building what should have been here all along." But it was more than that, and they both knew it. Every brick laid, every beam raised was a declaration, a statement that Caroline Aldridge was not going anywhere, that this place, wild, windswept, difficult, was hers to shape. Hugh kept his promise about the legal documents. His solicitor arrived from London with papers transferring half ownership of Greymoor to Caroline, irrevocably and completely. Separate accounts were established in her name, funded with enough money to make her financially independent for life. Caroline stared at the documents for a long time before signing them. "You understand what this means?" she asked Hugh, who sat across from her in the estate office. "If things don't work between us, if we decide this partnership isn't viable, I could stay here and you'd have no recourse to force me out." "I know," Hugh said calmly. "I'd have power over half this estate. The tenants, the land, the income. You'd be bound to me legally, whether you wanted to be or not." "Caroline," Hugh leaned forward, his eyes steady. "I'm giving you power because you've earned it, because you deserve it, Because making you vulnerable again would be the greatest mistake of my life. Sign the papers. Take what's yours." So she did. Her hand shook slightly as she wrote her name, Caroline Aldridge, Duchess of Thornborough. But the signature was firm. When it was done, Hugh's solicitor witnessed it, sealed it, and promised to file it with the courts within the week. Caroline felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite trust, not yet, but something close. The foundation of it, perhaps. The change in how people treated her was subtle at first, then unmistakable. Landowners who'd ignored her letters suddenly responded with courtesy. Merchants who'd questioned her credit now bowed and scraped. The magistrate, Mr. Hartwell, began addressing her with genuine respect rather than thinly veiled condescension. Word had spread about Sir Edmund's arrest, about Caroline's role in bringing him to justice, about the Duke of Thornborough standing publicly beside his wife, transferring property to her name, declaring her his equal partner. It shouldn't have mattered. The facts of what Caroline had accomplished hadn't changed, but perception mattered. And the perception of her had shifted from eccentric duchess playing at estate management to formidable woman who'd brought down a baronet. The invitations started arriving, dinners, teas, county assemblies. All the social events Caroline had been quietly excluded from for 3 years suddenly wanted her presence. She burned most of them in the fireplace. "You should attend some of these," Hugh said, watching another invitation curl into ash. "Make connections, build alliances." "I don't need their alliances," Caroline said. "I needed them 3 years ago when I was struggling to establish authority. They weren't interested then. I'm not interested now." Hugh smiled slightly. "You're still angry." "Wouldn't you be?" "Yes," he admitted. "But Caroline, these people, annoying as they are, they control access to resources, to markets, to political influence. You could use that." Caroline turned to look at him. "Is that what you want? For me to play the society game? Become a proper duchess who attends parties and makes polite conversation?" "I want you to do whatever makes you happy," Hugh said. "If that's ignoring society and focusing entirely on Greymore, then do that. But if you want to expand your influence beyond these moors, then society, unfortunately, is the tool you'll need." Caroline considered this. The truth was, she'd never wanted to be the kind of duchess who spent her life in drawing rooms. But Hugh had a point. If she wanted to create real change, schools for tenant children, better working conditions, agricultural reforms, she'd need allies with power. "One event," she said finally. "One. And if it's insufferable, I'm never doing it again." Hugh's smile widened. "Deal." The event they chose was a county assembly in York, a gathering of landowners, politicians, and wealthy merchants. The kind of place where alliances were formed and reputations were made or broken. Caroline spent days dreading it. She hadn't worn a proper evening gown in 3 years, hadn't danced or made small talk or navigated the treacherous waters of social politics. The skills felt rusty, foreign, like trying to speak a language she'd deliberately forgotten. The night of the assembly, she stood in her bedroom staring at the gown Hugh had brought from London, deep green silk with delicate embroidery, elegant without being ostentatious. "You look terrified," Hugh said from the doorway. Caroline turned. He was dressed in formal evening wear, black coat and white cravat, every inch the powerful Duke. It reminded her uncomfortably of their wedding day, the distance, the coldness. But when he looked at her now, there was no coldness. Only warmth and something that might have been concern. "I am terrified," Caroline admitted. "These people are going to judge everything. How I speak, how I carry myself, whether I'm worthy of being a duchess." "You're the woman who brought down Sir Edmund Moorfield," Hugh interrupted, "who rebuilt a failing estate, who fought a fire and saved lives. Trust me, Caroline, they should be terrified of you, not the other way around." Despite her anxiety, Caroline smiled. "How do I look?" she asked, turning slowly. Hugh's eyes tracked over her, and something shifted in his expression, something heated and admiring that made Caroline's breath catch. "Beautiful," he said quietly. "You look absolutely beautiful." The compliment shouldn't have affected her. They were married. This was performative, probably, but the way he was looking at her didn't feel performative. It felt real. "We should go," Caroline said, suddenly flustered, "before I lose my nerve entirely." The assembly hall was exactly as overwhelming as Caroline had feared. Chandeliers blazed overhead, music played from a corner orchestra, Hundreds of people in expensive clothes circulated through the room, talking, laughing, performing their wealth and status. When Caroline and Hugh entered, the room didn't fall silent. It was too well bred for that. But the attention shifted. Conversations paused. Eyes tracked them. Caroline felt her spine straighten automatically, years of deportment training kicking in. Let them look. Your Grace, Your Grace. A portly man with impressive whiskers approached, bowing. Lord Ashford, I don't believe we've been introduced, though I've heard much about you. Have you? Caroline said neutrally. Indeed. The business with Sir Edmund is quite the scandal. Terrible situation, though I must say you handled it with remarkable fortitude. The pause before fortitude was deliberate. A test, perhaps, to see if she'd accept the faint condescension. I handled it with the law, Caroline said coolly, which tends to work better than fortitude alone. Lord Ashford blinked. Quite. Yes. Well, he cleared his throat. I hope the trial proceeds smoothly. Such unpleasantness. Murder attempts generally are, Caroline said. Lord Ashford fled shortly after that. Hugh, standing beside her, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. You're supposed to be charming them, he murmured. I'm supposed to be myself, Caroline replied. If they don't like it, they can leave. More people approached, some genuinely curious, some clearly fishing for gossip. A few, mostly women, who seemed impressed by Caroline's reputation and wanted to know more about estate management, about how she'd learned, about whether it was really possible for women to do such work. Those conversations Caroline enjoyed. One woman in particular, Lady Pemberton, though not the same Lady Pemberton who'd sneered at Caroline on her wedding day, this was her daughter, apparently, was especially eager. I've been trying to convince my husband to let me review our estate accounts, Lady Pemberton said, her voice low and conspiratorial. But he insists it's too complex for a woman's mind. Hearing what you've accomplished gives me hope that I might change his mind. Don't ask his permission, Caroline said. Learn the accounts yourself. Hire a tutor if you need to. Knowledge is power, Lady Pemberton, and once you have it, no one can take it away. The younger woman's eyes brightened. I'll do exactly that. As the evening wore on, Caroline found herself relaxing incrementally. Not all of society was insufferable. Some people were genuinely interesting. Some conversations were worth having. And Hugh was a revelation. He stayed close but never hovered, introduced her to people who mattered, then stepped back and let her shine. When one pompous earl made a dismissive comment about women dabbling in men's affairs, Hugh's response was swift and cutting. My wife doesn't dabble, Hugh said coldly. She excels. Perhaps if more men focused on excelling rather than protecting their mediocrity, the world would be better managed. The earl sputtered and retreated. Caroline looked at Hugh with something close to wonder. What? He asked. You're defending me. Of course I am. You're my wife. Hugh paused. And my partner, and someone I'm very proud of. The words settled over Caroline like a warm cloak. Around midnight, they stepped out onto a terrace for air. The night was cold but clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Caroline leaned against the stone railing, breathing in the sharp air. That wasn't as terrible as I expected, she admitted. Hugh joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You were magnificent. I was passably polite. You were yourself, which is far more impressive than being polite. Caroline looked sideways at him. You've changed. Have I? The Hugh I married would never have criticized an earl in public, would never have defended me so openly, would never have, she trailed off, would never have stood beside you, Hugh finished quietly. I know. I was a different person then, colder, more afraid. He turned to face her fully. Losing you, or rather, nearly losing you in that fire, it clarified things. Made me realize that the life I'd built was hollow, safe, controlled, and completely empty. And now? Now I'm terrified, Hugh admitted. Because I care about you, and caring about someone means they can hurt you, but I'd rather be terrified and alive than safe and dead inside. Caroline's throat tightened. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 years ago, frightened, powerless, desperate for someone to save her, She thought about the woman she'd become, strong, capable, forged by wind and stone and solitude, and she thought about what it might mean to let someone in. Not to be saved, she didn't need saving anymore, but to build something together, to be vulnerable again, but from a position of strength rather than weakness. Hugh, she said carefully, you asked me to give you a month to decide if this us could be real. Hugh went very still. It's been a month. It has. And? His voice was barely above a whisper. Caroline took a breath. This was the moment, the choice that would define everything that came next. She could say no, could choose independence over partnership, could keep her heart locked away where it was safe. Or she could take the risk. I want to try, she said finally. Not go back to what we were supposed to be, not some fantasy of a perfect marriage, but build something new, something equal, something real. Hugh's eyes searched hers. Are you sure? No, Caroline admitted. I'm not sure at all. I'm terrified you'll hurt me again. Terrified I'll lose myself trying to make this work. Terrified that love isn't enough to overcome everything you put me through. Then why? Because I'm more terrified of never trying, Caroline interrupted. Of living the rest of my life wondering what we could have been if I'd been brave enough to find out. Hugh let out a shaky breath. Then slowly, giving her time to pull away, he reached for her hand. Caroline let him take it. His fingers were warm, slightly trembling. I love you, Hugh said, his voice rough with emotion. I know I've said it before. I know words are cheap, but I need you to hear it again. I love you, Caroline. Not because you're convenient or suitable or because it's expected, but because you're extraordinary, because you challenge me and inspire me and make me want to be better than I am. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know if I love you yet. Hugh smiled, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. That's honest. But I think I could, Caroline continued, given time, given proof that this is real, and not just guilt or fear or reaction to crisis. She squeezed his hand. So ask me again in another month, and another after that. Keep asking until I'm sure. I will, Hugh promised. I'll ask you every day if that's what it takes. They stood together on the terrace, hands clasped, looking out at the city lights. And for the first time since their wedding day, Caroline felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not exiled, not erased, but chosen, and choosing in return. The trial of Sir Edmund Moorfield began on a wet morning in late April. The courtroom was packed. Landowners, tenants, merchants, journalists, everyone wanted to witness the spectacle of a baronet on trial for attempted murder. Caroline sat in the front row, Hugh beside her, and watched as Sir Edmund was led in. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished. Prison had hollowed him out, turned his bluster into bitterness. When his eyes found hers across the courtroom, the hatred there was palpable. But Caroline didn't look away. She met his gaze steadily, chin high, and let him see what he'd created. Not a victim, not a frightened girl, a woman who would not be moved. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Margaret Thorne testified, her voice shaking but clear. The 2 men who'd set the fire testified, describing Sir Edmund's orders in damning detail. Physical evidence was presented: the torch, the monogrammed cloth, burn patterns consistent with arson. Sir Edmund's defense was weak. His solicitors tried to argue that the fire was an accident, that his men had acted without his knowledge, that the witnesses were unreliable, but the evidence was overwhelming. On the 3rd day, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Sir Edmund lunged from his seat, screaming about injustice and conspiracy, before the bailiffs wrestled him back down. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison. It was over. Caroline sat very still, absorbing the verdict. 15 years. Sir Edmund would be an old man when he emerged. Broken. Powerless. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like closure. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, tenants from Greymore, friends, supporters. When Caroline emerged with Hugh, they erupted in cheers. Standing with us. You stood for us standing with us. You stood for us first, Mrs. Hutchinson called out. Now we're even. The crowd dispersed slowly, and Caroline and Hugh climbed into their carriage for the journey back to Graymore. As the city fell away behind them and the moors rose up ahead, Caroline felt something loosen in her chest. It was done. The fight was over. The threat was gone. Now came the harder part, building a life. Hugh must have sensed her thoughts because he took her hand. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm not sure what to do now," Caroline admitted. "I've spent 3 years fighting to survive, to prove myself, to protect what I'd built. And now there's nothing to fight against." "So build something instead," Hugh said. "The school you wanted, the library, agricultural improvements, whatever brings you joy." Caroline looked at their joined hands. "And us? What do we build?" "Whatever you want," Hugh said simply. "A partnership, a friendship. Eventually, maybe more. But Caroline," he turned to face her fully, "I'm not in a hurry. We have time. All the time you need." Caroline felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears. Time, space, choice, everything she'd been denied 3 years ago, offered freely now. "Thank you," she whispered. Hugh lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, gentle, reverent. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you for giving me a second chance I didn't deserve." Spring turned to summer and Graymore bloomed. The south wing was completed by midsummer, the new servants' quarters bright and airy, the library magnificent with its walls of books and wide windows. The schoolroom opened in July with 12 tenant children and a young teacher Caroline had hired from York. The drainage improvements expanded, the fields flourished. The accounts showed record profits. And slowly, carefully, Caroline and Hugh built something that looked like a marriage. They worked together on estate business. They took meals together. They walked the moors in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Books, politics, childhood memories, dreams for the future. Hugh never pushed, never demanded more than Caroline was willing to give. But he was there, constant, steady, proving day by day that he meant what he said. One evening in late summer, they stood together on the same tor where Hugh had knelt and apologized months before. The sun was setting, painting the moors in shades of gold and crimson. "It's beautiful," Hugh said quietly. Caroline nodded. "It's home." "I never understood that before," Hugh admitted. "Home, I mean. London was just a place I lived. Graymore was a property on a ledger. But this," he gestured at the landscape. "This is home. Because you're here." Caroline looked at him, really looked. At the man who'd exiled her and the man who'd returned. At the distance they'd crossed and the distance still remaining. At the possibility of something real. "Hugh," she said softly. He turned to her, question in his eyes. "You asked me if I could love you, if I thought I could, given time." Hugh went very still. "Yes." "I don't think I could anymore," Caroline said. She watched hope die in his eyes, watched him start to pull back. Then she smiled. "I know I do," she finished. "I love you, Hugh. Not because you're perfect. You're not. Not because you haven't hurt me. You have. But because you came back. Because you changed. Because you gave me power and then stood beside me while I learned to wield it." Hugh's breath caught. "Caroline, I love you," she repeated, the words coming easier now. "And I choose you. Not because I need you, not because I have to, but because I want to. Because building a life together sounds better than building one alone." For a moment, Hugh just stared at her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't like their wedding kiss, cold and perfunctory and empty. This was heat and hunger, and 3 years of longing compressed into a single moment. Caroline kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her fear and hope and hard-won strength into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hugh rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend the rest of my life earning this," he said. "Earning you." "You already have," Caroline said. "Now we just have to figure out what comes next." "Together," Hugh said. "Together," Caroline agreed. They stood on the tor as the sun set, wrapped in each other's arms, and watched the moors turn from gold to purple to deep, velvety black. And Caroline thought about the girl she'd been, 20 years old, terrified, sent away to die in exile. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd built a kingdom from ruins, who'd fought and survived and triumphed, a woman who'd been broken and had rebuilt herself stronger, a woman who'd learned that love, real love, wasn't about surrender or salvation. It was about choice. And Caroline Aldridge, Duchess of Thornborough, sovereign of Greymoor, had made her choice, not to be rescued, not to be ruled, but to rule beside someone who'd finally learned what it meant to be her equal. The wind swept across the moors, carrying with it the scent of heather and rain and endless possibility. Caroline closed her eyes and breathed it in. She was home, and this time she was never leaving. 3 years later. The library at Greymoor had become the heart of the estate. On Saturday afternoons, tenant children filled the long tables, bent over books and slates while their teacher moved between them, offering gentle guidance. The shelves held hundreds of volumes now, everything from agricultural texts to novels to histories. Caroline stood in the doorway, watching a small girl sound out words from a primer, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "She'll be reading fluently by winter," a voice said behind her. Caroline turned to find Hugh approaching, their son balanced on his hip. William, 8 months old, dark-haired and gray-eyed like his father, but with Caroline's stubborn chin and fierce spirit. "Probably before her brother does," Hugh added, bouncing the baby gently. Caroline laughed and took William, who immediately grabbed at her necklace. "He's more interested in physics than literature. Did you see him with the blocks yesterday?" "I saw him knock over the tower and laugh maniacally. Not sure that counts as physics." They moved through the library to Caroline's office, smaller than the main estate office, but hers, a place where she managed the school, coordinated with other estates on agricultural reforms, and wrote the pamphlets on women's property rights that had made her moderately famous in certain circles. Hugh settled into the chair across from her desk while Caroline nursed William. "Letter from London," Hugh said, pulling an envelope from his coat. "Parliament wants me back for the autumn session. Something about agricultural subsidies." Caroline raised an eyebrow. "Are you going?" "Only if you come with me." Hugh leaned back, watching her with the easy familiarity of years. "You know, half the lords want to pick your brain about estate management, and Lady Pemberton is threatening to stage a revolt if you don't attend her salon." Caroline smiled. London trips had become bearable, even enjoyable, now that she went as herself rather than as an ornament. The Duchess of Thornborough, who'd brought down a corrupt baronet and rebuilt a thriving estate, had a certain cachet, it turned out. 2 weeks, Caroline said. "Then we come home." "Deal." William finished nursing and Caroline handed him back to Hugh, who cradled their son with practiced ease. "Do you ever regret it?" Caroline asked suddenly. "The life you could have had, if you'd married someone more conventional?" Hugh looked up, surprised. "What?" "You gave up a lot for this." "For me?" "The London social scene, the conventional marriage, the—" "Caroline." Hugh stood, crossed to her, and knelt beside her chair, echoing that moment on the tour 3 years ago. "I gave up nothing. I gained everything, a partner, a purpose, a home." He touched her face gently. "A family. You think I regret that?" Caroline felt her throat tighten with emotion. Even after 3 years of marriage, 2 years of genuine partnership, and 8 months of parenthood, sometimes the magnitude of what they'd built still overwhelmed her. "I love you," she said. "I know," Hugh said, smiling. "You tell me every day." "Because I want you to remember." "I could never forget." They stayed there for a moment, forehead to forehead, their son between them, while outside the window the moors stretched endlessly under a summer sky. This was what survival looked like, Caroline thought. Not just enduring, not just persisting, but thriving, building, creating something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. She'd been sent here to disappear. Instead, she'd become unforgettable. The exiled Duchess who'd built an empire, the discarded wife who'd claimed her power, the woman who'd learned that sovereignty wasn't given, it was taken, earned, forged in fire and wind and the relentless determination to never, ever break. And when history remembered her, and it wouldn't be as Hugh's wife. It would be as Caroline Aldridge, Duchess, reformer, survivor, queen of the moors, sovereign of her own destiny. And that, Caroline thought, as William grabbed her finger with his tiny hand and Hugh pressed a kiss to her temple, was worth every lonely night, every battle fought, every moment of doubt she'd endured. Because she'd won. Not just the legal battles or the social recognition or the property rights, but something deeper, herself. And no one could ever take that away.